The Senate will come to order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Cook, Coram,
Excused.
Crowder, Crowder, Danielson, Donovan, Finberg, Fields, Foote, Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hanson, Hill, Heisey, Holbert, Lee, Lundeen, Marble, Moreno, Pedersen,
Excused.
Priola, Rankin, Rodriguez, Scott,
Excused.
Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story, Tate, Todd, Williams, Winter, Woodward, Zenzinger, Mr. President.
Here. With 32 present, 0 absent, and 3 excused, we have a quorum. Senator Foote, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Thank you, Mr. President. Members and guests, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the journal. Senator Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the journal for Thursday, January 30th, be dispensed with and the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senate Services.
Correctly engrossed Senate Bill 32, 39, 46, 47, 79, 82, 91, and 100. Correctly engrossed Senate Bill 11 and 17.
Committee reports.
January 29th, 2020, Committee on Education has had in consideration hearing the following appointments recommended to be placed on the consent calendar and confirmed. Members of the Board of Trustees for Colorado Mesa University for a term expiring December 31st, 2020. Allison Ream Griffin of Lafayette, Colorado, public on occasion by the death of Tillman Bishop of Grand Junction, Colorado, appointed effective December 31st, 2019. For term expiring December 31st, 2023. Kelly Jean Burrow of Denver, Colorado, Democrat reappointed Alejandro Sanchez Jr. of Basalt, Colorado, Democrat appointed Ronald V. Davis of Edwards, Colorado, and affiliated appointed January 29th, 2020, Committee on Education, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 52 be amended as follows. This amendment be referred to Committee on Finance with a favorable recommendation. January 29th, 2020, Committee on Education, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 9 be amended as follows. This amendment be referred to Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation. January 30th, 2020, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 22 be referred favorably to Committee on Appropriations. January 30th, 2020, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 7 be amended as follows. This amendment be referred to Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation. January 30th, 2020, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 40 be referred favorably to Committee on Finance. January 30th, 2020, Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources, having consideration and had hearing on following appointments. Recommends the appointment be placed on the consent calendar confirmed. Member of the Groundwater Commission for term expiring May 1st, 2023. Glenn S. Free, Alpha Wiggins, Colorado, serves as a resident agriculturist from the North Keywood Bijou Basin, and occasioned by the removal of Daniel J. Farmer, L. Farmer of Colorado Springs, Colorado, reappointed January 30th, 2020. The Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration and hearing on following appointments recommended to appointments to be placed on the consent calendar and confirm members of the State Board of Land Commissioners effective June 30th, 2019 for terms expiring June 30th, 2023. Christine Marie Scanlon of Keystone, Colorado, to serve as a representative of local government and land use planning, and as a Democrat appointed Josephine W. Heath of Boulder, Colorado, to serve as a representative of public primary secondary education as a Democrat appointed January 30th, 2020. The Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration and hearing on the following appointments recommended appointments be confirmed. Members of the Parks and Wildlife Commission effective July 1st, 2019 for term expiring July 1st, 2023. Taisha Rashawn Adams of Boulder, Colorado, to serve as a representative of outdoor recreation and utilization of parks resources. Reappointed Elizabeth Ann Bletchow Ray, Colorado, to serve as a representative of sports persons and outfitters. Appointed Carrie Besson Hauser of Columbus Springs, Colorado, to serve as a representative of outdoor recreation and utilization of parks resources. Reappointed January 30th, 2020. The Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration and had a hearing on the following points and recommended appointments be confirmed. Members of the Parks and Wildlife Commission for terms expiring July 1st, 2022. Eden Vardy of Aspen, Colorado, to serve as representative of agriculture. Appointed Charles Frederick Garcia of Denver, Colorado, to serve as representative of sports persons. Appointed Luke B. Schaefer of Craig, Colorado, to serve as a member at large. Appointed January 30th, 2020. The Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration had a hearing on the following points and recommends appointments be placed in consent calendar. Confirmed members of the Colorado Water Resources and Power Development Authority for terms expiring October 1st, 2023. Michael Farber of Crested View, Colorado, to serve as a member from the Gunnison and Compadre Drainage Basin with experience in water planning and development. Appointed George Patrick Corkle of Walden, Colorado, to serve as a member from the North Platte Drainage Basin. Reappointed Stephen Eric Vandeviver of Alamosa, Colorado, to serve as a member of the Rio Grande Drainage Basin. Reappointed January 30th, 2020. Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration of Committee recommends following. Senate Joint Resolution 3 be referred to Senate for final action with a recommendation that it be placed on the consent calendar. January 30th, 2020. Committee on Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Consideration of Committee recommends following. Senate Bill 24 be postponed indefinitely.
Introduction of resolutions.
Senate Joint Resolution 6 by Senators Sonnenberg and Fields concerning the designation of February 4th as Missing Persons Day in Colorado.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Joint Resolution 6 lay over until February 4th.
You have heard the motion to lay over that resolution until February 4th. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. And that resolution will lay over until February 4th.
Perfect.
Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Mr. Carpenter, will you please read all the titles to the bills listed on the consent calendar?
Senate Bill 47 by Senators Williams and Tate represents Kraft, Thorpe, and Van Winkle concerning exemption from the definition of real estate appraisal and analysis prepared by agents of financial institutions for the institution's internal use only. Senate Bill 46 by Senator Tate and Representative Martin concerning clarification that electrical inspection fees may be doubled if an application for an electrical permit is not filed in advance of commencement for an electrical installation. Senate Bill 32 by Senator Holbrook and Representative McKean and Escar concerning the age of employees authorized to sell alcohol beverages at establishments licensed to sell alcohol beverages at retail. Senate Bill 91 by Senators Zenzinger and Sonnenberg and Representative Exum and Holtorf concerning increasing the minimum pay for state military forces called into service by the governor. Senate Bill 82 by Senators Heisey and Todd and Representative Landgraf and Lontine concerning awards issued by the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Senate Bill 79 by Senators Fields and Heisey and Representative Valdez D. concerning the method of notifying people of Amber Alerts to promote the largest reach of community notifications.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the passage of all the bills and then the third reading of bills consent calendar, which includes Senate bills 47, 46, 32, 91, 82, and 79.
Is there any discussion on any of the bills? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of all the bills on third reading, the bills consent calendar. Are there any no votes on any of the bills on third reading of bills? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, Senate Bill 047 is passed. Co-sponsors. Mr. Minority Leader. Senator Woodward. With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Bill 046 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Tate, with a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Bill 032 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Moreno, Bridges, Woodward, Hansen, with a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, Senate Bill 091 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Foote, Donovan, Bridges, Story, Danielson, Heisey, Janal, Crowder, Gonzalez, Rodriguez, Priola, Smallwood, Winter, Hanson, Fields, Williams. Majority Leader Lee, Woodward, Lundin. Please add the President. With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, Senate Bill 082 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Danielson, Foote, Crowder, Bridges, Janal. Minority Leader Marble, Sonnenberg, Story, Zenzinger, Priola, Gardner, Winter, Williams, Hanson, Tate, Fields, Smallwood, Rankin, Lee. Please add the President. Woodward, Hill, with a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, Senate Bill 079 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Bridges, Janal, Moreno, Gardner, Hanson, Winter, Smallwood, Rankin, Marble, Todd, Story, Lundin, Tate, Hill, Donovan, Danielson, Lee. Please add the President. Marble.
No.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to be added as a co-sponsor on Senate Bill 32 and Senate Bill 91.
Senator Marble will be listed as a co-sponsor on Senate Bill 32 and Senate Bill 91. Third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 039.
Senate Bill 39 by Senators Fields and Story and Representatives Valdez A. and Roberts concerning updated accessibility signage in a state-owned facility.
Senator Story.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Bill 39 for third reading and final passage and urge a favorable vote.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 039 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senator Hill. With a vote of 31 ayes, 1 no vote, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Bill 039 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Gonzalez, Danielson, Priola, Lee, Janal, Tate, Hansen, Bridges, Rodriguez, Todd, please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 100.
Senate Bill 100 by Senators Gonzalez and Tate and Representatives Arndt and Benavides concerning the repeal of the death penalty by the General Assembly in all circumstances charged on or after July 1st, 2020.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 20-100 on third reading and final passage.
Is there any discussion? Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, profound discussion yesterday. And as I mentioned in my concluding remarks, I respect each and every one of you. And I 100% represent where you individually come down on this very complicated issue. It's a multifaceted issue, touches on all kinds of areas of belief, religious belief, moral belief, criminal justice belief. What is justice? All I can do is make up my own mind, and hence here I am today. And as I mentioned yesterday, considering a whole range of issues, and I fully understand the complexity and how so many of those points have equally valid arguments and counterarguments. I have just decided that the state should not have the power over life and death in any circumstance, including this one. Thank you, members.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to thank you all for a powerful conversation yesterday. And I want to take a moment and I want to particularly extend my gratitude to my colleague from Aurora, because you have exemplified just how important it is to listen to one another and to be able to argue a position so zealously and so masterfully. I want to thank you for bringing your whole self to this debate, even when it's been difficult and even when it's been hard. That is us doing this work at our best. Is even when we disagree, when we treat each other with dignity and respect, that is when this chamber does its best work. So I just want to take a moment and thank you. To you, Senator, to your family, to all victims, I want to thank you all for engaging in this debate. You all have touched my lives in ways that are powerful and unforgettable. I also want to acknowledge my own senadora, Senadora Lucia Guzman. Because when I saw her arguing on this bill, I thought, wow, how could I ever seek to be someone as powerful as she, as eloquent as she? And so to my senadora, I want to thank you as well. And I want to leave you all with a quote from her. That hopefully, in passing Senate Bill 100, hopefully our society will have a transformation when violence is no longer the definition of justice. And with that, colleagues, I ask for an aye vote on Senate Bill 100.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, we were created in the image of God, and that is a very good thing. And part of what that means, in my understanding, is that it's an aberration. It is against the natural order for one created in the image of God to willfully take the life of another created in the image of God. And that applies throughout the entire course of natural life, from the moment of conception, the moment two cells come together and life begins, to the moment of natural death, and those two cells, through all their iterations, begin to go back to the dust, as we were told. And so for me, the government should never be in the business. We should never be in the business, as much as possible, of taking another human life. From what I would say is the violence and the abhorrence of abortion, taking a human life, to the death penalty, taking another human life. And after, I think, very healthy and good debate, maybe some of the best debate I've seen here in the Senate yesterday, is my conclusion that the right approach, my conscience demands that I vote to abolish the death penalty in Colorado.
Senator Phillips.
Good morning, Mr. President and colleagues. I first want to thank my colleague from Denver who sponsored this bill for her kind words and acknowledgement. Thank you. I also want to thank the folks that are behind me in reference to all the work that we do down here. It might look easy when you're watching it on TV, or if you're watching it behind those glass windows there. But it takes a lot to do the work that we do. So I just have a card of appreciation for the Senate Secretary and all the staff and the sergeants for all the work they do to make sure that the decorum that we have is in order and that we are protected and safe. So thank you. My heart is heavy, and my soul is a little empty because my son is no longer here. We just heard the senator from Colorado Springs talked about we're all created in the image of God. I believe that. But I can tell you, you should never, ever underestimate the power and the love that a mother has for their child. You should never underestimate the power that a mother has for her son. You should never, ever underestimate the power that a mother has for their family and their friends. It's something that cannot be discounted. We all serve here because we know there's someone that is behind us that has our backs. And yet, when we had this really respectful debate, it was brought to my attention that my arguments were a distraction. It was a distraction. Let me tell you what a distraction is. A distraction is this: the police at your door. Your son has been hurt. You need to come to the hospital right now. You rush to the hospital. You try to get information. The medical staff aren't able to tell you because they're waiting for the police to tell you. That is a distraction. I was minding my own business. Law-abiding, tax-paying citizens working in the private sector. It was a distraction to have my son, who was innocent, be taken away from this world. Really? Because I'm arguing about this Senate Bill 100, it is a distraction? No, it's not. It's not a distraction. And for someone to claim that my arguments are distraction, then it might be based on privilege. Not everyone lives on easy street. Crime does happen in our community. This I know for sure because it happened to me. It was a serious distraction. It turned my world upside down. I didn't want to breathe. I didn't even know how to take my next breath. That was a distraction. God forbid that you never have to experience the distraction that I had to encounter. That's a distraction when you're confronted with violence, when someone who is innocent is going about their business and their life is taken. That is a distraction that deserves our attention. And to devalue and to diminish the debate, calling my argument a distraction, is offensive. No one raises their hand and say, I want to be a victim today. But people are being victimized every single day. And your vote today is going to be recorded in history as it relates to how we feel about victims. It's going to be recorded. So either you support public safety or you don't. Either you support law enforcement or you don't. That's the question. The question is, what side are you on? Who are you protecting and who are you serving? We all have heard all the reports as it relates to crime. They're horrific. We talked about them yesterday. Really? Are we standing on the side of someone that kidnaps kids? Are we siding on the side where law enforcement can't be protected at the interest of, I'm not quite sure what side you're on. I know clearly where I stand, and I stand on the side of crime victims. And my argument is not a distraction. Then we heard arguments about what happened in committee. We heard that people came and they testified, and there's like, what, 66 families that kind of came together and they signed a letter, and then we were told about reams of paper. Someone brought in reams of paper. So I'm just going to just say that, let's say that these are reams of paper. I buy paper. I buy it on sale. But let's say that the ream of paper is $7. So we have this argument about reams of paper that was portrayed in testimony in committee hearing. Let me tell you, reams of paper, this might be $28. Do you know how much it costs to bury someone? It's not $28. When we talk about the cost of justice and people telling me that that's a distraction, you don't understand the cost of justice when it comes to burying someone that you love. I buried my son, and it cost more than any reams of paper that was demonstrated in a committee hearing. Not only are we talking about burying someone, the cost also includes when you have to open and close a grave. And then there's this ripple effect. The ripple effect is how it impacts your family. This is where I have to take a break to talk about my daughter. Everyone focuses on the mom because she has lost her child. But there's also a sibling, the older sister, who lost her brother. There's also a community that has lost the promise and the potential of a promising young life. His life and his tragedy and my tragedy is not a distraction, and it's worth more than reams of paper.
Would the good senator from Arapahoe County like to be extended to your next 10 minutes of speaking?
Yes, Mr. President. Can I come back to do that?
Please proceed, Senator.
My argument is not a distraction. It is the kind of debate we should be having. And when I look at what we did as a body, I appreciate the support. Because I saw myself out there on a limb. I don't know if you know this analogy. You know how you're out on a limb and sometimes you look around and nobody's behind you and someone's sawing away? I was out there on the limb. And people were sawing away at what they perceived as a distraction. Because I'm advocating for justice for my son. But I want to thank my colleague. There was one that came to support my position on my side of the aisle. And there was others that supported my position, and they lend voice for and against. And I appreciate that we're all involved in the spirit of discussion. 21 states have abolished the death penalty. That's not even half. You know how many states we have in the United States? Only 21. What does that say about the other states that are maintaining that policy within the governance of their state? We talked about it yesterday in reference to how narrow the aggravators are as it relates to pursuing and seeking the death penalty. It's not often sought. And what this body is doing is they're mandating the abolishment of the death penalty at the expense of victims. Who are you serving and who are you protecting? By this action, by abolishing Senate Bill 100. Are your actions going to inspire the next evil wrongdoer? Come to Colorado. The door is open. You can go to any county across our state. You can commit any kind of heinous, cruel crime, and we already know your penalty. Your penalty is going to be life in jail without parole, and you get 3 meals a day. You get health care. You get to have visitors. You get to have money on your books. You can interact with society. I'm not quite sure we want to telegraph that to the world in the great state of Colorado. I believe that we should be leaving this question about the repeal of the death penalty to the people of Colorado, the people who live and work in communities across our state. We should not take this choice away from them. And when we have done it, look at history. Look at the record. The citizens of Colorado have come back and they said that they trust the people who are elected to decide when this sentence is worthy and justified. And we have good stewards that are doing it because it's not often sought. It's just really baffling to me in reference how we want to focus on this issue, which is a dark, dark issue. When you talk about death, we're talking about darkness. And I believe that each of us should be the light of the world. And we've been spending almost 2 days talking about 3 men that have committed heinous crimes and others that might happen beyond today. We have infrastructure issues that need to be addressed. We need to address how we fund our schools. The governor has mentioned his high priority is about access to health care and reducing the cost of medication. We don't have to look far to understand the challenges that we face in our community, and we want to talk about 3 men that are on death row who've already made their decision. Their decisions was not about protecting their future. Their decision was about killing the innocent. My son should still be alive today, and his story is not a distraction. And his story cannot be summed down to reams of paper. His life has value, and so do many of the other victims. I am just a vessel. I can stand here today because other mothers pulled me out of a dark, dark place. They punched holes in my darkness, and they pulled me out, and they shared their stories with me. So I am a surrogate for everyone that has been a victim of crime. Because it hadn't been for them pulling me out of my own darkness, I couldn't be here today. So I stand on the stories of every crime victim because I know your struggle and I know your pain. And my goal is to always to lend voice to those who have been harmed by crime. So as I close, members, today you're making history and your vote will be recorded. And the record and the history would show when the General Assembly has done this in the past, the people of Colorado have come back and said, not so. Not so. We want this option. So be aware of the vote that you're taking today because it will really reflect if you're for public safety, if you're for law enforcement, are you for victims or you're not. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? Sarah Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I hesitate to begin speaking this morning for fear that I might detract from my colleague from Arapahoe County and her compelling plea to all of you. So it is my hope, since I know that I cannot in any way add to her plea, that by speaking this morning, I do not in any way detract from her plea to you. I picked up the newspaper this morning. Actually, I picked up my tablet and punched a button, and the newspaper came up. And I read the coverage of our debate yesterday. It's always interesting to me. We, inside this chamber, have a view of what happened and as it happened to us and what we saw, and then it's always interesting what the people of Colorado will read about what we thought we did, what we thought we said. And I saw one of our colleagues, our colleague from Commerce City, was quoted as saying something along the lines of, you either support the death penalty or you don't. And I said to myself, you know, that's right. I've said that myself many times. You either do or you don't. But though it may come as a surprise to many of you, I walk around in a conversation and with myself in my head about, is what I really think, what I say, is that really correct? And the truth of the matter is, many of us, it is true that we either believe in the death penalty or we don't. We've arrived at our conclusion about the death penalty, its morality, its efficacy, over many years and much thought, and the likelihood that we would change, or let me say from hard, unimaginable experience, we've come to that view. And it's highly unlikely we might change our mind. But for some of us, and I respect this because I think it shows a thoughtful, caring, moral person that continues to struggle with the right answer to, should the state impose the death penalty? I always come to third reading asking myself, is there any possibility you'd change a vote at all anyway? Or are we just speaking for posterity? But I think there are some thoughtful people here. And I want to speak to those of you who are struggling with this question today. And let me suggest, too, I think those people struggling are. Recall yesterday that our colleague from Arapahoe County offered an amendment to this bill that was adopted. It was an amendment that you find in the very first section of this bill that will become part of Section 16 of the CRS, death penalty repeal applicability current sentences. And we adopted by a pretty strong margin yesterday, after rejecting pleas to put this in front of the people of Colorado, and shortly thereafter, this chamber voting to repeal the death penalty. We adopted a couple of lines in there, and they say, this section does not apply to a person currently serving a death sentence. Any death sentence in effect on July 1, 2020 is valid. I want to speak to those of you who voted in favor of that amendment. Because to me, that reflects ambiguity at the very best. The death penalty is either wrong, and it would be wrong to impose upon the 3 that are in our prisons, or it's appropriate. And it's appropriate, not preferable, not something that we as a society in any way relish, but appropriate for the 3 who are in our system today, awaiting the governor to act on a warrant to do what a jury and, in essence, the law of Colorado has said. And yet, some of us both voted for the bill and voted for this amendment. Now, I only can surmise, I've thought, I will tell you from that moment yesterday, I've puzzled in my mind about why would someone do that? And here's what I think the answer is. Our colleague who we know, we agree with, we disagree with, we struggle with, we co-sponsor bills with, we vote against her bills sometimes, and we're proud to serve with her and we love her. Our colleague, whom we know, represents the people in Colorado who are victims of these crimes. And because we know her in person, and because we know that, frankly, 2 of those 3 are the murderers of her son, his girlfriend, who have made our colleague suffer a loss that none of us who have not suffered that could ever imagine. Because of that, we're unwilling. Some set of us are unwilling to say, no, let's take those people off, because we look at our colleague and we say, well, in that case, we know that person. Our colleague from Commerce City this morning was right. You either believe in this or you don't. And it's a hard call, and it's a tough moral choice. But your chance to give that choice to others, to the people of Colorado, that one's passed. And we come here to represent our constituents and the people of Colorado. And let me suggest to you and to those of you who, on the one hand, voted for this bill and on the other voted for this amendment, because those three people need to have the death penalty imposed. That's what this amendment says.
Would the good senator from El Paso County like to be extended to your next 10 minutes?
Mr. President, please extend me, and appreciate your indulgence.
Please proceed, Senator.
Members, I call upon you to think about that. If you are one who made this choice, and I believe it was the right choice, because you know our colleague and because you see it personally, because you understand her loss, colleagues, tomorrow or next month or next year, sometime in some place, there will be another mother, sister, father, husband or wife, like our colleague. There will be the family of a law enforcement officer, a corrections officer, someone who has made the right choice to go to court and testify. Those people will be at risk, and they will have families, and they will be like our colleague. This bill is not dealing with the future alone. It deals with the past as well, and our past experience must inform our choices for the future. Colleagues, particularly for those of you who made this choice to say, those who have had their death sentence imposed, they will stay. You have said, because I know and I understand that situation, and because I understand the loss of those families and of our colleague, that yes, we're going to leave those sentences in place. I submit to you that you have said by that yes, it can be appropriate. There often is some truth in things that are said, and they're said in ways that they're meant one way and they're meant another. And I thought, as our colleague spoke about, and rightfully so, with indignation, I think, righteous indignation, that her arguments, her presence, her discussion is a distraction. You know, it was a distraction. It was a distraction in this way. People go down a path and they think they're right, and they have reams of paper brought to them that are to persuade them someplace, and they read all of that paper and they see all of that, all of those statistics, and people say these things are so, and a bunch of people come into the committee and say they're so. And then something else, and someone else says something, and your attention is distracted, and you look at that, and you look at a friend, you look at a colleague, you look at a victim, and you say, oh, maybe I better take another look over here. I suggest that that is what our citizen legislature causes us to do when we encounter our colleagues who are lawyers and bankers and farmers and school teachers and insurance agents and crime victims. We have passed the opportunity, unfortunately, to let the people of Colorado decide this. Perhaps in the House they will think differently, and I pray that they do. Our colleague asked, who are you serving? Who are you protecting? I'm serving and protecting the people of Colorado. I was willing to trust the people of Colorado. We should have asked them. But we are not. And so those of you who have rejected that option have in some sense assumed the responsibility, said, I'm going to keep that responsibility. Answer our colleague's question this morning. Who do you serve and who do you protect?
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, again this morning. This is a unique situation. I could not have said better what the previous speaker just said. And he touched upon an overarching thought that I wanted to illustrate. So I thank you for your words. And out of respect for everyone's time, I won't repeat them. And also, he was far more eloquent than I would have ever been, even though he's just a simple country lawyer. I heard more yesterday. I think you remember that I explained that I spent the last year doing a lot of listening due to the gravity of the issue we're discussing again today. But what I heard again yesterday was that one's faith, their religion, drove them to fiercely support this measure, and that the next person's faith, their religion, drove them to oppose it. One's, in the lack of faith, maybe, or religion, one's morals guides them to support this measure, and one's morals guides them as individuals to oppose it. The good senator from Aurora maybe said it the best at the end of a very long debate, which is part of why I decided to come on third reading to again show my support for her and her position, and the position of many in this room, and the position of most Coloradans across the state. She said, "It seems that you've drawn a line between victims and someone else's interpretation of what justice is." I think that was pretty well said. What the previous speaker just said was that because she is our friend and our colleague, she makes this understandable. The reasons she is asking and begging for us to preserve this tool that is used to seek justice on behalf of the victims' families who have had loved ones raped and tortured and murdered, if the families and the district attorneys see fit. I'm interested in protecting the public safety, respecting the actual victims' wishes. There was a lot of really good theoretical conversation yesterday about what is right and what is wrong for the victims of these crimes. What do you think the victims of these crimes deserve. What your opinion is of what is right or wrong when dealing with these heinous crimes and those who committed them against innocent people. What your opinion is. But what we are reminded of is that one of these families, one of the victims of these heinous, horrific, unimaginable crimes, is sitting with us every day. And it's not just that she's my friend and my colleague and that I know her, because she is. It's because she makes it real in a way that the good senator described that changed the position on the policy for some of you in the chamber. I am looking forward for those victims that come next. For people who are willing to kidnap, rape, torture, murder children, and how we decide to deal with those crimes and the victims of those crimes. For a punishment that is reserved for these most heinous and terrible, unthinkable, horrible crimes. Do you want to take the tool away for future families, understanding that your connection to one of these victims makes it real to you? Makes an exception appealing to you? Do you want to do that for the future? I am choosing to instead side with the victims and the district attorneys who we depend on to make the right decision when seeking justice for these kinds of crimes and for the families that they impact. I'm choosing to side with the vast majority of Coloradans who do not support abolishing the death penalty. And I thank you for your time and consideration on this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sarah Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I want to thank the good senator from Aurora with her passionate argument and well thought out and convincing argument. I feel wholly inadequate following her. Again, like I said yesterday, nobody really can understand her pain. We can try, but only if you've been in it, been through it, then you can understand and feel the pain. You know, the good senator from Colorado Springs mentioned that we're all created in the image of God, which I firmly 100% believe. But the Bible doesn't stop there, it continues on. God commands, not just in the Old Testament, God commands what punishment it is to kill somebody because we are made in His image. God loved us so much that He said, if anybody destroys my image, if somebody kills someone that I created in my image, then they deserve to die themselves. That's how much God loved us, because He did not want to see things that He created to be destroyed by other people. We heard from the good senator yesterday from Sterling, who mentioned New Testament passages that justify the death penalty. So it's not just an Old Testament, it's not just in the Old Testament. It's also in the New Testament, where Jesus came and He offered us forgiveness and redemption. But in the New Testament, it still says that the government has a right to use the death penalty. I heard it again said that it's state-sanctioned violence. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's state-sanctioned justice. To say that it's state-sanctioned violence It's either state-sanctioned violence for one thing or for everything. So I would have to assume those that think it's state-sanctioned violence thinks that the United States should not have gone after Osama bin Laden, that we should not have killed him. We should have let him live out his life in Pakistan so that he could plot other terrorist attacks and kill more Americans, because the state doesn't have a right to take his life. I think of Timothy McVeigh. The U.S. government still has the death penalty, and they put Timothy McVeigh to death for killing over 130 people in Oklahoma City. A large number of them school children. So under that line of thinking, putting him to death is violence, and it's not justification. To say that the only reason to support this bill is you're pro-life, unfortunately, supporting it under that grounds is at the expense of innocent lives over those of the guilty. There were several studies that I cited yesterday that said for every execution carried out in this country, there are 4 to 17 lives that are saved. So it is a deterrent. And I am pro-life, 100%. 100% when it comes to the life beginning at conception. But I can draw the difference between killing the innocent versus the guilty. You know, over the last couple of days, several supporters of this bill, several, 1, 2, 3, came to me and said, hey, we see what this is doing to our good colleague from Aurora, and I've stood with her from times past, and every time something comes up, I see it hurts her a little bit more and affects her a little bit more and gives her a little bit more stress, and I see the damage it's doing to her. And I wish I'd have thought about it the last couple of days when I was approached. But I was thinking about it last night, and I thought, no one has that right to make that decision for her. The only one that knows how it affects her is her. And she has told us time and time again that she needs closure. So this is not going to help her. Passing this bill is not going to give her closure. She's going to have to live with it every single day. It's her decision on how she feels, not members of this body. I started off yesterday with a quote from Mark Twain that said, get your facts first and then distort them as you please later. And I feel that's what's happened with this bill during testimony. We know the death penalty in Colorado is not based on race. We know it's not a plea bargain that the DAs use as a bargaining chip. That's a distortion. Another distortion is that it doesn't deter other murders. It's a distortion to say that it's supporting it for pro-life reasons. It's a distortion to say that it's not popular amongst our constituents. It's a distortion to say against it on religious grounds. Again, we heard many witnesses come in and talk about their faith and their religion and how they oppose it on religious reasons, some being Catholic, some being whatever. But yet a majority of those people that belong to those religions still support the death penalty. Another distortion is about the cost and about innocent people being put to death. We know that those are distortions. I want to read some names. Margaret Colbert, Colleen O'Connor, Sylvia Cromwell, and Benjamin Grant, the victims of the Chuck E. Cheese murder. If I'd have asked anybody in this chamber who they were 2 days ago, I bet you nobody would have known. The good Senator from Alamosa mentioned their names yesterday, so I assume everybody, as of yesterday, would know who they were. But I'm kind of curious if 2 days ago, if I'd have said, who are these people? No one would have known. Maybe not even anybody would have cared. But unfortunately, they're the lost ghosts in this state. And there's 2 other victims that we might not have known about. Well, at least one, Vivian Wolf. It's like, who is she? Well, she was the fiance, the future daughter-in-law of the good senator from Aurora. Now, the only name that we might have remembered is Marshall Fields, and that's because the good senator from Aurora keeps his memory alive in this chamber, keeps his memory alive in our hearts and our soul and in our minds. And I thank you for that. What happens when she's gone? What happens when she leaves? Is he just going to be another forgotten soul that nobody really knows about or cares about? Unfortunately, we all know the names of the murderers. We never forget about them, which I think is a total injustice, that we forget and don't care about the victims, but we care more about the guilty and the names of those that committed the murder. I support the death penalty, not only because it's a deterrent and a fitting act of justice, but because properly carried out, it is the only penalty that truly reflects the enormous value of innocent life. There are times when it's the only punishment that truly fits the crime. Those victims that I read earlier, unfortunately, they're buried and gone. They're never going to see another Christmas. They're never going to see their children or grandchildren because they're buried. So why do we allow these 3 guilty parties, and maybe even future guilty parties, to have Christmas, to see their families, to have 3 meals a day, to have free medical care?
Would the good senator from Weld County like to be extended into your next 10 minutes?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Why do we let them have 3 meals a day, free medical care, computers, TVs, and live out the rest of their lives while those victims are dead and gone and buried and unfortunately forgotten? You know, like I said earlier, I'm pro-life 100%. And again, I can draw the distinction between the guilty and the innocent. You know, I think we all believe that each life is precious, unique, and irreplaceable. The death penalty is the only penalty that approximates the value of what it was taken. It does not reduce the value of life, but affirms the supreme value of innocent life. There will only be one Margaret Colbert. There will only be one Colleen O'Connor. There will be only one Sylvia Crowell. There will be only one Benjamin Grant. There will be only one Marshall Fields and only one Vivian Wolf. So when you take your vote today, please think of those victims and their families. And I urge a no vote on the bill. Thank you.
Senator Lundin. Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Madam President. To take a human life. We've all contemplated this deeply and thoroughly. Some have resolved the matter in their minds prior to the discussion we had yesterday and this extension of that discussion today. For me, I entered the conversation yesterday unresolved, unsure, torn. Between 10:30 a.m. and 2 p.m., I stood on both sides, marginally, of that decision. Francis Bacon said, "Reading makes me fat, writing makes me precise." And that's exactly what I did between noon and 2. I sat at my desk and I wrote. I tried to think my way through this matter by writing. Now I rise to speak to you today, comments I did not intend to give, but I'm giving them because I don't think I'm going to change your vote. I don't think I'm going to change your mind. But perhaps somewhere in this chamber or somewhere where others may care to listen, these words might change a heart. And that is the purpose of me sharing my expression of this experience. For me, this issue, and ultimately my conclusion on the legislative matter, rests on the foundation of my faith and how it informs my role as a legislator in a broken and fallen world. While my personal hope transcends the surly bonds of this world, my duties as a senator call upon me to make decisions that generally extend no further than the temporal or the terrestrial. Please let me share a little bit of my journey through this issue, my thinking, and share with you my conclusion. Leaning into the wisdom literature, perhaps the most compelling arguments against capital punishment are examples of capital criminals who were not executed, such as Cain, Moses, and David. All three are examples drawn from the Old Testament, a dispensation when God's righteous wrath was routinely and properly meted out. All three were admitted guilty perpetrators of aggravated murder, and God spared each one of them. Further, the Jewish interpretation of the Old Testament law reflects a reluctance to impose the death penalty. For example, circumstantial evidence was not admitted. 2 eyewitnesses required for execution had to have warned the accused in advance he was about to commit a capital crime. And if the 2 witnesses' testimonies differed, acquittal was required. An additional qualifier among the jury ruled that men presumed to lack compassion were excluded from ruling on capital cases. In a story from the New Covenant, Jesus made clear in a specific circumstance before a group of self-righteous religious leaders that only those without sin were qualified to perform execution, a condition which clearly prevents any human drawing breath the ability to perform an execution, an apparently impossibly high bar. Which leads me to the perfect answer to this matter, and I believe the philosophical and spiritual pathway to the abolition of the death penalty. It rests in the hope that stands offered for all. It is a hope for a transformed life for each of us as individuals, and by extension, a restored and healthy society as a whole. Here's that argument. Christ's death on the cross ended the requirement for blood recompense and blood sacrifice, the death penalty. The sacrifice of Jesus, the Lamb of God, also replaced the sacrifice of animals. Here's the key element. His death also made it unnecessary to execute murderers to maintain human dignity and value, because the crucifixion forever established the intrinsic value of every human being, each one of whom are created in the image of God. It's almost incomprehensible, beyond human comprehension, how the resurrection of Christ reinforces that reality. Hebrews 9:14 says, "How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God?" Alas, we as a society fail to embrace this offer that transforms individuals and by extension society. And therefore, this potential permanent resolution to the matter before us is not accessible. As society rejects this offer, it demands upon itself a human and temporal and terrestrial response. And that is the law of the land in place today. Now, my reading of the New Testament says that no passage expressly mandates capital punishment. Several imply its appropriateness. For example, in Romans 13, Paul calls his readers to submit to the authorities of civil government, reminding them that if you do wrong, be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword for nothing. In its ultimate use, the word sword implies execution. And that is the authority, the heavy mantle that falls upon this body as a government instituted among the people to govern today's affairs. So, New Testament passages assume the existence of the death penalty, but don't take a position one way or the other. Romans 13, just referenced, comes closest to speaking to the state's authority to execute. But significantly, it refers to the state's authority, not obligation, to execute. This is consistent with the position that states are permitted, not mandated, or prohibited the use of this sanction. I find this final argument compelling, and I have resolved to peace and a decision on the matter. It is my judgment that the state does have the authority to execute clearly proven, clearly aggravated situations. But, and here's the nuance, it should do so sparingly and with great attention to the possibility of repentance and the changing of a heart. As a society, we must be, and I believe we are, reluctant to terminate the life of anyone, even the guilty. As God spoke through the prophet Ezekiel, he said, as surely as I live, this is the voice of God, not the voice of Paul Lundeen, as surely as I live, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. I find that this is the circumstance in which we find ourselves in Colorado today. Execution is allowed, and it's allowed only in limited circumstances when there is no meaningful doubt, when heinously aggravating circumstances have been proven, and notably, a potential for repentance and government-sanctioned clemency exists. I will therefore vote no on this matter to preserve the existing law. And my hope extends to a conversation beyond this matter and beyond the temporal and beyond the terrestrial. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. As I said yesterday, I think this has been one of the most respectful, thoughtful, and honoring debates that we've had in this legislature, and I really appreciate my colleague from Colorado Springs bridging the church and state connection, because I think those issues are unmistakable in this particular deliberation about this ultimate sanction, the taking of human life by the state. I would certainly want to thank the good senator from Aurora for bringing her thoughtful wisdom and tragic circumstances to us, as that is a key component of our discussion today. The circumstances that you have suffered, as has the sponsor of the bill, are unmistakable and compelling, and are part of what we must be thinking about as we give thought to this issue. I think one of the statements I heard this morning, that justice in Colorado should not be defined by violence, is very compelling. I think 2 weeks ago we celebrated Martin Luther King Day in this chamber, and at that time I recited some quotations from Dr. King, one of which was that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That statement compels me to a discussion of the evolving standards of decency in a civilized society. If we look around the world if we look around the United States, we see that the moral arc of the nation states is towards abolition of the death penalty. Various numbers were cited in the committee hearings. Both 150 and 117 countries were cited as having abolished the death penalty worldwide. What is unmistakable is that the United States is alone amongst Western countries in retaining a death penalty. The death penalty exists in Japan, in South Korea, it exists in Iraq, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Indonesia. It does not exist in England, France, Germany, Italy, other countries that we consider to be our Western economic peers. Most countries are moving away from it either statutorily or as a matter of practice, which is also the trend amongst the states. The number 21 has been cited as the number of states who have abolished the death penalty, but as a practical matter, other states have abolished the death penalty. I'm not sure where to put Colorado in that. We have a statutory death penalty in Colorado. Our last execution, Gary Davis, was 50 years ago. Two recent cases which may seem appropriate even under the 17 criteria of the death penalty. One, the James Holmes massacre of 12 people and 55 wounded in the Aurora Theater, and the other, I can't remember, the nightclub in Denver where a man walked in and executed 3 people. Multiple murders under heinous circumstances fit the criteria of aggravating circumstances which justify the death penalty. As a practical matter, the juries in Colorado have abrogated the death penalty. When we talk about the evolving standards of a society that is moving towards evolved standards of decency, remember, hanging was the common penalty for homicide, but also for pickpockets in England, for minor offenses, also for more major offenses, robbery, burglary in England under the Anglo-Saxon law resulted in execution. I believe it came out in hearing that horse thieves in Texas have been executed by hanging. So we have eliminated hanging or execution for all but capital murders. We eliminated rape as a grounds as we evolved our standards in this more civilized society. We have moved from flogging and branding and such things. I would suggest that the abolition of the death penalty is part of the trend of evolving standards of decency in a civilized society. But there are other reasons that I support this bill and I support the abolition of the death penalty. There was varying testimony, but we heard from many victims who support abolition of death penalty, people who have been the victims of serious crimes or family members who have been victims of serious crimes came with compelling testimony before the Judiciary Committee and urged abolition of the death penalty. We had prosecutors and district attorneys. We had corrections officers come before the Judiciary Committee urging abolition of the death penalty. It is not merely prosecutors all favoring the death penalty. Many oppose the death penalty, as do many in law enforcement. We hear conflicting testimony about whether death penalty is a deterrent. I can tell you from my practical experience in the criminal justice system, criminals don't expect to be caught. criminals don't think about being caught and being punished for their crimes very often. Most don't. Most think that they'll get away with it. So as a deterrent, the National Academy of Sciences studied the issue and came to the conclusion that punishment, the death penalty, is not a deterrent for crime. But again, as we heard, there are conflicting interpretations of those issues and conflicting interpretations of what we heard in the committee. Additionally, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many courts, including the Supreme Court in the past, the death penalty has been held to be constitutionally infirm as violative of the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The Supreme Court always deals with a specific statute, and that one was Furman versus Georgia. They held those statutes to be violations of cruel and unusual punishment. They cited the infrequency of use, the unpredictability of use, the variability of use, that it made it virtually impossible to predict who would end up with the death penalty. I won't go on about the costs of the death penalty. I think it is almost inappropriate to talk about costs in a criminal justice system, but that issue has been discussed, and anyone who has practiced in the criminal justice system knows that significantly more resources go into a capital case than go into another murder case. Finally, I urge consideration of where we are taking this state of Colorado as we move forward in the 20th century. We have been engaged in a systematic mass incarceration of people, undeniably mass incarceration of people of color. The opportunity for mistakes, the opportunity for error is not only possible, it has been demonstrably proven that we make mistakes in the criminal justice system. There have been 156 exonerees from death rows around the country, according to the Death Penalty Information Center. That's since 1979, 156 people who were slated for execution, who were found to be
Would the good senator from Colorado Springs like to be extended into your next 10 minutes?
Thank you, Madam President, I would.
Proceed, Senator.
Thank you. The opportunity for error, quite frankly, keeps me awake at night, and it ought to be in the forefront of all of your consciousnesses. We have executed Joseph Aridi in 1900, a mentally handicapped individual who was established to be innocent of the crime of murder in Pueblo. He was in fact in Wyoming when the crime occurred, but he was executed in the Colorado State Penitentiary, and he was given a pardon, a posthumous, full, unconditional pardon by the governor, former district attorney Ritter. There have been other cases of people who have been convicted of capital murder, including Tim Masters and 3 others, not death penalty cases, but murder cases, who were exonerated, and in one case where they found the prosecution engaged in improper withholding of evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are flawed human beings. We make mistakes. With death penalty, it is an irrevocable mistake, and we cannot make that mistake. I urge your support for this bill as we bring Colorado into a more evolved standard of justice and truth in our society. Thank you.
Senator Priola. Senator Priola.
Thank you, Madam President. And members, I didn't intend to speak on this subject out of respect for another member, but since it has reached a theological discussion in many points. I simply wanted to come down here and clarify some things. There's a lot to read in the Catechism, and I won't go into the details on my background and what I've studied, but I'll read a couple of paragraphs. Today, however, there is an increased awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensures the due protection of citizens, but at the same time, do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. And I underscore redemption. Consequently, the Church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the involuntary and the dignity of the person. Also, this is directly from the Catechism. It's 982, or you can look it up through Part 1, Section 2, Chapter 3, Article 10. There is no offense, however serious, that the Church cannot forgive. There is no one, however wicked and guilty, who may not confidently hope for forgiveness, provided his repentance is honest. Christ, who died for all men, desires that in his church the gates of forgiveness should always be open to anyone who turns away from sin. Members, by this policy being on the books in the state of Colorado, we are short-circuiting for how many years the ability of someone on death row to seek repentance and forgiveness for all eternity in the eyes of God.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Madam President. There are demons that walk among us. And how we respond to those demons does not reflect on their souls. It reflects on ours. And the choices we make about how it is that we are going to treat these people reflects the kind of society that we wish to have. My colleagues have come up and spoken about how the New Testament gives the authority to government to commit capital punishment. And I'll refer to another quote that was given yesterday. John 19:11, Jesus speaking to Pilate, "You would have no authority over me if it were not given to you from above." But when Pilate subsequently crucified Jesus, that did not reflect on Jesus' soul. It reflected on Pilate's. And it reflected on the sins of the Roman Empire because it was a state-sanctioned murder. State-sanctioned murder, by the way, of the only man in history, according to our Christian faith, who is truly innocent. We may have that right, but that does not mean that we should choose to execute that right. And I'll do one better. Hobbes and Locke, the foundation of our Western democracies, they said that the state, what defines the state, is the monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. There is no question from a theological perspective, a Christian theological perspective, there is no question
from a Western democratic historical perspective that we have a right as a government to have capital punishment as an arrow in our quiver. The question is, who are we? Who are we if we choose to use that arrow? When Jesus was killed, it didn't reflect on his soul. It reflected on those who chose to kill him. There are demons among us, and how we treat them reflects on us. And the choice we make today determines what kind of state we have, and the choice we make today reflects on our souls. And while there are demons among us, I pray that today, in this chamber, our better angels prevail, and we abolish the death penalty in Colorado. Thank you.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you all for the debate yesterday and comments today. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 100. And as I tried to express yesterday, it was truly an honor. It was historic to stand with the good senator from Aurora. It occurred to me last night as I was thinking through the comments made yesterday, the struggle that I had in 2013 on an entirely different topic. The senator from Aurora and I were both in the House, and she was sponsor of a bill that I adamantly opposed, and I was the first one to the microphone to speak against it. A day or two later, my brother-in-law in Milwaukee texted or emailed and said, "Oh, I saw you on TV." Oh. Said, "I liked what you had to say, but it sounded like your voice cracked. It sounded like you were about to tear up." And I said, "Yes, I was." My passion for the Constitution was confronted when I looked at my friend from Aurora and compared my compassion, my passion for the Constitution, and her passion for her son and her future daughter-in-law. And the underlying policy is one that I adamantly opposed, but I was conflicted because I realized we were having a debate over something that she cared about passionately for entirely different reasons than I opposed it. If the death penalty were somehow unconstitutional, I think our courts would have already answered that question. I think that the good senator from Aurora has made clear with her expertise, her unfortunate, unique expertise on this topic, that the courts have held that it is constitutional. If the people of Colorado wanted to dispense with the death penalty in their state, they could have, but they have done the opposite. By a vote of the people, they reinstated the option to have the death penalty in their state, in our state. I recall my brother-in-law noting that it sounded like my voice started to crack a bit back in 2013. And I recall standing here on opening day in trying to introduce a young man who's an epileptic and relies on cannabis-based medicine, that my voice was cracking then. But Senator, I don't know how you made it through yesterday, and your voice never cracked. The passion and the determination that you have to stand for justice is the most admirable thing I've seen in this building. And thank you. It was an honor to stand with you. It is an honor. I don't know how you did it. To my colleagues who share my faith, though maybe a different denomination, I respect your reading of God's Word. I trust that you respect mine and those who see it a different way. I think we have a responsibility as brothers and sisters in Christ, or other religions, I suppose, that I don't understand, to look out for each other, and as a society that we have this option, not if we choose. The prior senator asked, who are we? We really need to be thoughtful about who we are, what we stand for. Well, we are not jury. This is not a courtroom. We are here to make public policy for the state of Colorado. And those of us who are selected to serve on juries and those who are appointed and retained to be judges in our courts, those who are elected to be our district attorneys, the prosecutors, it is those shoulders that this responsibility falls upon. But by passing this bill, by removing this option, we're telling them that they don't have that tool. They don't have that leverage. I appreciate the perspective of a district attorney listening to a defense attorney saying, you know, if we can avoid the death penalty, my client will produce evidence that led to the discovery of murder victims. That leverage won't exist anymore. I understand the desire to take this power away from government because I have often referred to a quote, the government is not eloquence, it is not reason, it is force. And like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. So why would we allow this option to be maintained by that dangerous servant and fearful master? Because it isn't up to government. Government doesn't decide to use the death penalty. Jurors, our peers, who have that immense responsibility, make that determination along with family members. Thank you, Senator, for explaining all of those aggravators. Thank you that I've not had to learn that the way you did. Thank you for teaching us. It was said earlier that we ought not allow government to have the power to willingly take the life of another. Government doesn't have that power. Again, that's a decision that's made by jurors. And then government, I think we as a society unwillingly might take the life of another. It hasn't happened here in decades, though the option exists. I doubt my words or those of any other will change a vote here. But I do think back to that opening day speech, and thank you all for your patience in listening to it. But yesterday and even today give me confidence, a sense of pride in one aspect of our state constitution, that Article 5, Section 22A prohibits caucus positions. How could anyone assume that anything like that exists on this bill? We have members of the minority voting in favor, members of the majority voting against, and vice versa. But there are 35, or I guess today a few excused, there are 35 co-equal members of this chamber, and every one of us who is here today is about to cast a historic vote for which we will individually be accountable. If you're asked, you can't say in this state, well, leadership said vote this way or that way. My constituents said vote this way or that way, or emails. No, you should listen to your constituents. But you have to answer this question: I voted yes or no because of these reasons. It's your vote. And this isn't the first time that we've seen a bill that, in my opinion, goes against the opinion, the perspective of the majority of people here in Colorado. And it's with them, and I appreciate the senator from Arvada earlier, or Wheat Ridge, I believe, when she mentioned that she believes, and I believe, that we stand together with the majority of people of Colorado who say they want our district attorneys, they want our judges, they want the jury of their peers to have the option of using the death penalty. I will vote no, and I hope you will too. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. And had lots of time to do my Lamaze breathing, but it's not kicked in yet. So give me just a moment here. I want to take us back a little bit. And I want to step back with my good friend from Arapahoe County. 16 years ago, I stood with her on the east steps of the Capitol. At that point, she was a citizen. She was a grieving mother. I stood with she, her mom, her dad, her sister, Vivian's mom, and we were talking about and proposing a bill on witness protection. Some of you know Senator Nancy Spence, former Representative Mike Garcia, and they were the sponsors. That was how I got to know my good friend from Arapahoe County. It was under dire circumstances, it was under real circumstances, and it was under great pain. Her son was murdered in my House district. It was before I was a representative, before she was a representative or a senator. But it was a piece of history that in Aurora brings shame, brings heartache. And as we stood on those steps and we talked about the importance of doing the right thing, raising your children to do the right thing, to speak up when you see something wrong. And that's what Javad did. He spoke up, and he was being a witness, and he gave his life for that. Not voluntarily, certainly did not want that end result. But he did. And as a result of that, it gave a momentum, and it gave a passion, and it gave a fight in the heart and soul of a mother. It gave an energy that is difficult to ever encapsulate, that is ever difficult to compare with any other. And as a result of that, the fight has gone on. As I have shared on a one-on-one with my good friend and said, you're not alone. It feels alone because of the way the vote is coming out. But there are many of us who are strongly compelled to say, we believe in justice, we believe in natural consequences, we believe in a strong judicial system, we believe in support for our law enforcement, we believe in law and order, and we believe in putting a halt to the amount of violence in our country. Make no mistake, regardless of the way someone votes on this bill today, does not mean there is a lack of compelling passion for fighting violence in our country and doing justice and seeing justice. The end result is whether it is a death penalty or a life sentence. I know many of us have visited prisons. I have gone, in fact, we laughed yesterday when Mark Waller was on the floor. We used to always laugh and say, we met in prison. We met on a prison tour. And when I visited and I saw the life imprisonment and the life that those people are living, it is not one of luxury. It is not one of privilege. It is not one of much joy. So when we think that a person that is imprisoned for life is living the good life, they're not. They are definitely suffering every single day more punishment than death itself. I couldn't help but think this week or yesterday, it seems like it's been longer than that, but just yesterday and today, as we were discussing and seeing two other families, and then earlier with the Keys family, who lost their children to heinous crimes. The perpetrators, the murderers of their children, are not on death row. There are only 3. Unfortunately, all 3 of those happened in Aurora. Chuck E. Cheese murder was done by a young man that my husband taught in elementary school. We're very familiar with that case. It happened at less than a half a mile from my house. There are only 3 that are in death row in Colorado right now. So imagining those families who say, I lost my child, and the crime was life imprisonment. They didn't get the death penalty. There wasn't that decision made, either by a jury or by the judge. And so part of where I have really struggled with who qualifies and who doesn't qualify for the death penalty and how does that really get implemented, those are questions I have really reckoned with. This is my 3rd and final time to hear this bill and to have this question posed in front of me. As a House member, I voted yes to repeal, and I voted no not to repeal. I will share at the end how I will be voting today. I think one of the things that I want to make very clear is how I have, again, personally watched and walked through 16 years with my good friend. I have the most respect for the voice of Senator Rhonda Fields. I have the most respect for the way she has advocated. But I have also watched her die a little bit each appeal that has come forward. I have watched her go to court. I have talked with her before and after, and I have seen the heartache of that reopening over and over and over again through the appeals. And as I've talked with other families who have gone through the same situation of appeal after appeal after appeal and having to sit and listen over and over to the horrors of what took place and see that person over and over who took the life of their loved one. And know that it will continue to go on and go on and go on until finally, as with Nathan Dunlap, there are no more appeals left. That pain and that anguish does not go away. The question was posed earlier, how can you possibly vote for the amendment for the 3 that are on death row and be opposed to the death penalty? Well, I'll share with you why I can do that. I can vote for that because that is what the law on the books was at the time of the crime and the time of the judgment. That was what the law was. And so I believe that if the law is on the books, you either use it or you change it. And that is what we are debating today. So it was very easy for me, once again, to stand with my good friend and also with justice.
Would the good senator from Aurora like to be extended to the next 10 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will, and I will be very brief as I wind up. So, Senator Fields, you ask who has your back? Your friends, your family, most importantly, your God. And that is never going to go away. I will be an aye vote today. The reason I will be an aye vote is because I believe that the death penalty is not a deterrent. I do not believe that that is going to stop the crime. What is going to stop the crime is the way each and every one of us reaches out and makes this a better, stronger world every single day. That when we see behavioral health issues and we can intercede and we can help stop some of the violence from escalating, that's how it begins. And then when there is a crime, that there is justice that is seen, and that we continue to pursue and support our law enforcement, that we continue to rise up and say, not in my country, not in my state, not in my house are we going to turn an eye to violence against other people. That is where it begins. And when we make a statement that there is a consequence, your life will not be joyous when you enter the prison system if you take another life. But taking one other person's life is not going to solve it, is not going to take it away. And I don't believe in the long run is going to heal the hearts of those who have suffered a loss. May God bless you, my friend, and continue to heal you.
Senator Tate is recognized. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. In committee, a litigator brought stacks of papers that I referenced in yesterday's debate. And this morning, my colleague referenced papers as well. And so I want to close by calling attention to another set of papers that arrived on all of your desks yesterday. It's short. You may have missed it. Maybe it's already in your filing cabinets. Maybe it's already in the recycle bin. But it's a letter from which I'll quote. Our direct experiences with the criminal justice system and our struggles with grief have all led us to the same conclusion. Colorado's death penalty fails victims' families. We never asked to be in this position and would do anything to change it. Nothing can erase the pain that a senseless act of violence brought into our lives. Thank you. But we can honor the memory of our loved ones and other families who may face tragedy by working for effective responses to violence. And so, to Ezra Aldern of Denver, son of Wendy Mae Aldern, murdered in Aurora, to Bob Ottoby of Pueblo, father of Eric Jason Ottoby, murdered in the Lyman Correctional Facility, Victoria Baker Wilford, daughter of Carolyn Jansen, murdered in Aurora. To Dale Beck of Estes Park, the brother-in-law of Christine Ann Clark, murdered in Wisconsin. To Margaret Beck of Estes Park, sister of Christine Ann Clark, murdered in Wisconsin. To Katie Benson Smith of Cotopaxi, daughter of Sergeant Mary K. Ricard, murdered in the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Crowley. To Rachel Butel Hadley of Aurora, daughter of Tammy Augustine, murdered in Iowa. To Linda Burks Brown, sister of Willie Frazier, murdered in Denver. To Brenda Carrasco of Denver, the cousin of a victim murdered in Denver. To Pastor Mike Pennington Devine of Denver, the father of Devon T. Sutton, murdered in Florida. To Barbara Scout Dunn of Fort Collins, the sister of John Kent Breckenridge, murdered in the Caribbean. To Judith Elaine, the sister of Ronald Eugene Shatler, murdered in Denver. To Frank C. Evans of Denver, uncle of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Mabel Ines Evans of Aurora, the grandmother of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Charlotta Evans of Aurora, the mother of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. And to Talisha Evans of Denver, cousin of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Robert M. May of Denver, the brother-in-law of a victim murdered in Oregon. To William H. Mays Evans of Aurora, the uncle of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Rachel Jean Gaines of Aurora, sister of Frederick Leon Martin, murdered in Missouri. To Jean Gregory of Denver, mother of Stephen Gregory, murdered in Aurora. To Sean Gruno of Westminster, nephew of Polly Elizabeth Sullivan, murdered in Denver. To Senator Lucia Guzman of Denver, the daughter of Tom Guzman, murdered in Texas. To Lieutenant Hollis of Denver, the uncle of Faye Johnson, murdered in Denver. To Calvin Hurd of Aurora, brother of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Lori Jansen of Boulder, daughter of Helen and Richard Pelham, murdered in Golden. To Arliss Keller of Greeley, the sister of Dwight Tobine, murdered in Arizona. To Brian Keller of Greeley, the brother-in-law of Dwight Tobine, murdered in Arizona. To Sherry Landrum of Denver, mother of Kurt Liddell Levias Jr., murdered in Denver. To Francie Kuzenga Leifer of Loveland, daughter of Reverend Dr. Henry Kuzenga, murdered in California. To Angela Lee of Denver, mother of Galen J. Armstrong, murdered in Denver. To Frank D. Lytle of Colorado Springs, son-in-law of Johnny Banks Sr., murdered in Indiana. To Rosemary Harris Lytle of Colorado Springs, the daughter of Johnny Banks Sr., murdered in Indiana. To Kathleen Maestas of Denver, mother of Jeronimo Mo Maestas, murdered in Denver. To Antoinette Martinez of Denver, mother of David Martinez, murdered in Denver. To Tom Mauser of Littleton, father of Daniel Mauser, murdered at the Columbine High School in Littleton. To Bernard Mays of Aurora, the nephew of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Michaela Mays Milliner of Aurora, cousin of Kassan Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Elvira Maxwell, mother of Darren Dwayne Sneed and Charles Sneed Jr., murdered in Denver. To Dr. Mary McNeil Jones, PhD, of Denver, wife of Wayne McNeil, murdered in Kansas. To Rebecca L. Oakes of Denver, the daughter of Marge Kohnberg, murdered at Chuck E. Cheese in Aurora. To Sara Perez of Denver, aunt of Deontay McDonald, murdered in Denver. To Angel Perez of Denver, the cousin of Anthony Montoya Jr., murdered in Thornton. To Michael Pinelli, of Englewood, the brother of Anthony Martinez murdered in Illinois. To Amy Plapp of Colorado Springs, the sister of Stephen Plapp murdered in Texas. To Lynn Porter of Aurora, the aunt of Casson Xavier Evans murdered in Denver. To Suzanne D. Price of Denver, mother of Andre Price murdered in Denver. To Alice Randolph of Lakewood, the mother of Loren Anthony Collins murdered in Aurora. To Christopher Randolph of Thornton, brother of Laurent Anthony Collins murdered in Aurora. To Tim Ricard of Crowley, the husband of Sergeant Mary K. Ricard, murdered at the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Crowley. To Gail Vanderjot Rice, sister of Denver police officer Bruce Vanderjot, murdered in Denver. To Dr. Robert Price, the brother-in-law of Denver police officer Bruce Vanderjot, murdered in Denver. To Gail Rogers of Aurora, the cousin of Casson Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Pris Sanders of Denver, the daughter-in-law of Stacy Cohen, murdered in Denver. To Marilyn Shelton of Denver, mother of Tyrone Ivan Adair Jr., Bossman Goody, murdered in Denver. To Christine Sykes of Denver, the aunt of Casson Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To Carissa Tomlin of Aurora, the niece of Frederick Leon Martin, murdered in Missouri. To Barbara Ott Voss of Grand Junction, the sister of Thomas Ott, murdered in Connecticut. To Charles Derek Waits of Denver, the father of DeJuan Derek Childress, murdered in Denver. To Monica Lynette Waits of Denver, the stepmother of DeJuan Derek Childress, murdered in Denver. To Isaiah Ward of Denver, cousin of Carrick Summers, murdered in Denver. To Thomas G. Ward Jr. of Colorado Springs, the brother-in-law of Stephen Plapp, murdered in Texas. To Domine Ware of Aurora, the niece of Frederick Leon Martin, murdered in Missouri. To Roy Wayne Watley of Aurora, the cousin of Casson Xavier Evans, murdered in Denver. To David Works of Denver, the father of Stephanie and Rachel Works, murdered at the New Life Church in Colorado Springs. And to Marie Works of Denver, the mother of Stephanie and Rachel Works, murdered at the New Life Church in Colorado Springs. And to Davida Young of Denver, the family member of a murder victim. It is in your names, and with great respect, that I ask for an aye vote on Senate Bill 100.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members, each and every one of you. Here in the final moment, I think we all agree that the core issue is justice. And I've asked from this podium, and perhaps rhetorically, questions I think that we've all been asking ourselves, and that is, what kind of justice does capital punishment purport to render? And who is this justice for? And as a practical matter, does capital punishment deliver on its promise? You know, as elected officials in a representative democracy here in a Republican form of government, we are both delegates and trustees charged to make these difficult decisions in the best way we can as individuals on the law and about justice. And I respect each and every one of your decisions. Deeply respect that. And to answer a colleague, you know, we are here serving many people. We're also serving the truth. It's always elusive, hard to find, and difficult to understand. Thank you, Mr. President.
Having no further discussion, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 20100. A roll call has been requested. Mr. Carpenter, please poll the senators.
Senators Bridges. Bridges, aye. Cook. Cook, no. Quorum, excused. Crowder. Crowder, no. Danielson. Danielson, no. Donovan. Donovan, aye. Finberg. Finberg, aye. Fields. Fields, no. Foot. Foot, aye. Gardner. Gardner, no. Janal. Janal, aye. Gonzalez. Gonzalez, aye. Hanson. Hanson, aye. Hill. Hill, aye. Heisey. Heisey, no. Holbert. Holbert, no. Lee. Lee, aye. Lundeen. Lundeen, no. Marble. Marble, no. Moreno. Moreno, aye. Pedersen, excused. Priola. Priola, aye. Rankin. Rankin, no. Rodriguez. Rodriguez, aye. Scott, excused. Smallwood. Smallwood, no. Sonnenberg. Sonnenberg, no. Story. Story, aye. Tate. Tate, aye. Todd. Todd, aye. Williams. Williams, aye. Winter. Winter, aye. Woodward. Woodward, no. Zinzinger. Zinzinger, aye. Mr. President.
Aye.
Mr. President, aye.
With 19 ayes, 13 no votes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, Senate Bill 100 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Moreno, Lee, Hanson, Donovan, the Majority Leader, Bridges. General Order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for general consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion is adopted, and the Senate will resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar, and Senator Gonzalez will take the chair.
The committee will come to order. The Cope rule is relaxed for all in the chamber. Will the clerk please read the title to all the bills on the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar?
Senate Bill 36 by Senators Zinzinger and Cook and Representatives Liston and Melton concerning the submission to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency for proposed revision to the state implementation plan that would enable a vehicle that fails the onboard diagnostic test solely because the check engine light is illuminated on the vehicle's dashboard to undergo a tailpipe emissions test.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the adoption of the one bill on the consent calendar and its associated committee reports, which include Senate Bill 36, along with the Transportation and Energy Committee report.
Is there any discussion on the Transportation and Energy Committee report? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of all of the reports to all the bills in the general orders, second reading of bills, consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thanks. Opposed, no? The ayes have it. The reports are adopted. Is there any discussion on any of the bills on the consent calendar? The motion before the body is the adoption of all of the bills on the general order, second reading of bills, consent calendar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bills are adopted. Majority Leader Fenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion is for the committee to rise and report. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Barely. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The committee will rise and report.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has had a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee will basically report that consideration of the following test bills being second reading. There makes following recommendation to run Senate Bill 36 as amended to pass second reading order and gross place accounted for third reading and final passage.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the adoption of the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 036 as amended passed on second reading, ordered and gross and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage.
You said you were good to go. Cool. So, we should just hold it. A card on my desk. Right, we provided. Thank you very much. Otherwise, you're coming right back down.
So I have an SOMB meeting going on. I mean, appearance in front of that.
General orders, second reading of bills. Senator Gonzalez. General order, second reading of bills. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The Senate will resolve itself into the committee of the whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills. And Senator Hansen will take the chair.
Committee will come to order and the court rule is relaxed. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we proceed out of order to take up Senate Bill 108.
Thank you. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The Senate will proceed out of order for consideration of Senate Bill 108. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 108 and ask for an aye vote.
Oh, my apologies. Senator Gonzalez, I'm now going to call to read the title of Senate Bill 108.
Senate Bill 108 by Senator Gonzalez, concerning a prohibition on a landlord engaging in certain activities related to a tenant's citizenship status.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 108 and its associated committee report.
To the bill. Pardon me, to the committee report. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The local government committee had a long and extensive discussion and produced a fine committee report amending Senate Bill 108 accordingly and asked that it be adopted.
Is there any further discussion on the committee report? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am proud to bring to you for your consideration Senate Bill 108. This bill has to do with the ways in which what questions landlords can ask when engaging with certain tenants. And this is actually a bill that was brought to me from a constituent, a lawful permanent resident and his U.S. citizen husband. When they were applying for a rental apartment, they were presented with two different sets of forms, and they felt that was surprising and discriminatory and approached me, and accordingly we have worked together to prohibit inquiry or demanding someone's citizenship status in order to rent an apartment. And I ask that Senate Bill 108 as amended be adopted.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 108? Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did hear this in committee, and I was a no vote on it. I think there were some good points brought out, but the remedies is what would not work. One of the civil actions was a $2,000 fine paid directly to the individual who was renting, plus court fines. I do believe that the bill does more harm to the people who are trying to rent apartments than it helps. Once the landlords find out that they are subject to this $2,000 fine plus court cost, I think it will be more difficult for people to find housing, which is a shortage now. So I was a no on it, and I will continue to be a no on it. Thank you.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Senator. The good senator from Alamosa. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The good senator from Alamosa, we did have this conversation about the fines, and the reason why we worked intentionally to establish the $2,000 fine was to put forward a fine that would hopefully change behavior on part of landlords across the state of Colorado, and also in coordination with the Colorado Apartment Association, we did extend the date of implementation of this bill through an amendment to January 1st, 2021, in order to allow landlords to receive the education on the best practices moving forward. The fee itself is not meant to be a financial gain for tenants in any way. In fact, the loss of a lawsuit often exceeds $10,000, such that this fee does not encourage recovery of loss. But we did want to put forward something that would hopefully encourage a behavioral change. The penalty amount matches the penalty found in the Illinois state law prohibiting the same behavior signed into law in August of 2019. Thank you.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the bill sponsor's efforts. And as I read through the bill, the questions that come to mind for me immediately, and I did not have the opportunity to hear the testimony in committee. I was not in that committee. We have a large body of federal law, federal fair housing and so forth that intersects with this, and as I'm reading through it, I'm concerned perhaps that there might be some unintended consequences, that the rights of individuals by virtue of laying this in inelegantly perhaps over federal law might create complications or difficulties for them that we do not intend to do. Do you have an explanation of how this articulates and interacts with federal law?
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the good senator from Monument. I would respond that we also in committee and in concert with organizations that do receive federal funding. So you'll see in the first section of the bill there is prohibited conduct, and in the second section of the bill there is allowable conduct. And the form
that had been put forward by the Colorado and National Apartment Associations was promulgated, I believe, in the mid-90s initially, and that form had received some sort of approval from HUD, and the question was raised in committee, doesn't that mean that the form's fine and that we don't need to change this? And actually, and in response, and hopefully in response to your question, HUD is tasked with interpreting and enforcing regulations under the Fair Housing Act, which has no application to discrimination on the basis of immigration or citizenship status. So HUD didn't approve the use of that form outside stating that the form on its face didn't violate the Fair Housing Act, unless explicitly used to discriminate on the basis of national origin. And that's the gap in law that we need to address, and hence the promulgation of this bill. Had someone said, I'm discriminating against you because you look Mexican, that's different than I'm discriminating against you because you are a non-citizen.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much. In my mind, questions still remain. Another question that rises would be the idea that this may present more paperwork burden for both tenants and more paperwork burden for landlords.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the good senator from Monument. There already exist a number of mechanisms that that a landlord can obtain a potential renter's creditworthiness or information or background. All of that continues to be allowable, but what we are seeking to do within Senate Bill 108 is to no longer allow the demand around someone's immigration status in order to rent an apartment. Again, in testimony, a lawful permanent resident and his U.S. citizen husband had to go through, even though they were married, had to go through different processes in order to attempt to be approved for their apartment.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 108? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 108. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 108 is adopted. We're going to... Yeah. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title of Senate Bill 038.
Senate Bill 38 by Senator Finberg and Representative Hawkins Lewis concerning the establishment of a statewide standard for the sale of biodiesel blended diesel fuel in Colorado.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I request a senatorial 5.
Without objection, we'll take a senatorial. Mr. Majority Leader. Nice try. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 38 along with the Transportation and Energy Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. To the committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did make some changes in the committee to the bill. We actually did a strike below. Just a reminder for folks, this is an interim committee bill. The strike below, I think, clarifies some of the things that we intended to do with the bill in the first place, so it doesn't change the spirit of it. It just adds some exemption processes. It says which industries would be waived or exempted from having to follow the requirement for the percentage of the fuel being biodiesel or renewable diesel. It also adds renewable diesel as something that qualifies to meet the requirement, as well as a couple of other technical pieces such as referencing certain fuel specs and federal code. I ask for an aye vote on the committee report.
Further discussion on the Transportation and Energy Committee report. Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Transportation and Energy Committee report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. Committee report is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader, to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So members, Senate Bill 38 is really at the end of it about making sure that we are doing what we can to improve our air quality. We have, as was just recently reported in national news, Denver actually has some of the worst air quality in the entire country. We are at the worst 10 cities. Major cities. That's bad. I think that's something we have to take very seriously. I know a lot of the legislation and things that we have discussed in this chamber is addressing that. I think this is a pretty reasonable approach to continue down that path. This simply requires that diesel fuel sold in Colorado after a certain date is 5% blended biodiesel or renewable diesel. Currently, most diesel fuel sold in the state of Colorado actually is allowed to be up to 5% and still be labeled as diesel under federal law. This simply brings up that to 5% for, I think, 4 months of the year during the non-attainment period, during the kind of the ozone season in the summer. And then in 2023, it requires that percentage to go up to 10%. There are other aspects of this bill that have to do with specifically exempting locomotives and for mining equipment, but then it also gives the oil, the OPS, the Oil Public Safety, I think it is, division to have a process for providing more waivers for other specific users or for the actual refineries or the retail establishments as well. So it is a mandate, it is a requirement. It is actually quite narrow just for a handful of months in the year and in just a portion of the state, just in the non-attainment area, and also provides for a process to provide future additional waivers and exemptions that aren't specifically outlined in the bill. But I do ask for an aye vote, and I know there will be some discussion coming. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what the Majority Leader is trying to accomplish here. But what I think we are missing is the potential unintended consequences. Now, for those of us in agriculture, I understand that that's no longer an issue. For those of us that have trucking companies, it is an issue. And I'll tell you why. It's not my opposition to using biofuels. It's my opposition to what the warranty does if I use biofuels. Now, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with my friendly Colorado Kenworth dealer, actually the service manager, and I said, tell me, if I use biodiesel, does it void my warranty? Here's his answer. He says, if you use up to 5%, no, but if we can attribute the damage to your engine to biodiesel, it does void your own warranty. Two years ago, I put an engine in one of our trucks. Incidentally, I'm putting an engine in another truck as we speak. I can't afford that risk. It takes me $15,000 to $20,000 to change out an engine. I can't be shelling out $15,000 to $20,000 if the warranty is voided because some damage is charged to or tied to the biodiesel. Now, here's what Detroit Diesel says with their
gives with their engines. Let me back up a little bit. Series 60 Detroit diesels prior to 2004 say we're not recommended to use this biodiesel. After 2004, you can to certain levels, but to understand that that warranty still is an issue. And now you ask 2004, what would still be in warranty in 2004? When you do in-frame overhauls or do the bottom end, there comes a warranty with that. So if you get a 500,000, 750,000 miles on an engine, and you drop the pan and change the bearings, there's a warranty associated with that. So those engines are still viable for this warranty or the lack of warranty. Here's what Detroit tells us. You need to increase your oil change intervals when using biodiesel, okay? Replace your fuel filters at half of the recommended service. In other words, twice as often. Biodiesels, blends are less stable than diesel fuel and should not be stored for more than 1 month. So for those of us that have our own storage and bring in truckloads, semi-loads of fuel for our fleet, that becomes an issue. Now, I understand, and maybe the majority leader will correct me here, that some of that has been dealt with the non-attainment. So let me explain to you how this will work for those of us in the trucking industry. We just won't buy fuel in the non-attainment areas. We can't afford that risk. I cannot afford to buy fuel that may hurt my engine. Now, if it meets all those standards, it's not supposed to, and the tests show that. I'll give you that. But if for some reason I buy biodiesel and it can be shown that that's tied to the failure of my engine or the damage to my engine, my warranty goes away and I have to put out another, whatever it is, if it's $10,000 to do the bottom end or to replace the engine. So what you're going to do, essentially what this bill does is in those 4 months, you will see trucks avoid buying fuel in non-attainment areas. And actually, I'm kind of thankful to that because my truck stops in Brush, Sterling, Lyman. They're going to be busy because when people come into Colorado, they're going to want to fuel up there rather than in those non-attainment areas. Again, Mr. Majority Leader, I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish here. The unfortunate part is the unintended consequences that you will have for folks like me in my industry is we will find other ways to buy fuel. And what I was prepared to say before we did the non-attainment areas, when we did it to all of Colorado, my fuel would then come out of the North Platte refinery. And I don't think we want to do that. I don't think we want to set this up to be that type of marketplace. You know, we talked about it with ag tax and how our chemicals were being taxed in another state or not in, or taxed in Colorado and not in another state, and how farmers went across the state lines to buy those chemicals in that short period of time. You'll see the same thing with diesel and biodiesel. Just want you to understand what you're asking the state of Colorado. Mr. Majority Leader, thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit how I see this impacting my industry and my trucks alone.
Mr. Majority Leader. Is there any further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Majority Leader.
I have an amendment, and then I'm happy to respond to some of the concerns maybe after we discuss the amendment, because it is a pretty small technical one.
All right, so we do have an amendment at the desk. Will the clerk please read Amendment L009 to Senate Bill 38?
Amendment L009 to Senate Bill.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L009.
Thank you. To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This simply says what renewable diesel is. It is actually a term that is not defined in the bill. Some folks wanted to make sure it was clear what we are referring to. It references the federal code, which defines what renewable diesel is.
Thank you. Further discussion on L009? Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a supporter of biodiesel. It's a fine fuel. It burns cleaner. It does gel a little at a little higher. Oh, I am sorry. I am out of order. Find me as you will.
Senator Heisey, since I've gotten a pass a few minutes ago, I'll give you a pass as well this morning. Any further discussion on L009? All right, seeing none, the question before us is adoption of L009. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. L009 is adopted. Now, Senator Heisey, back to the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to my love of biodiesel, or at least my belief that it is a viable fuel source. It does burn cleaner. It gels sooner. For those of you who have not driven truck, when you're driving a truck down the road and your fuel gels up, you know you've just signed up for a bad day. Been there, done that. It was cold. It was North Dakota in the wintertime. But I voted to move this out of our interim committee. I am wishing I had stayed a little more involved in the bill. You know, the nearest biodiesel facility is somewhere in Iowa. We can't put it in a pipeline because you can't take the risk of contaminating the fuel or the jet fuel that goes in those same pipelines. So that means it's coming out here some 600 and some odd miles on truck or by rail. And guess what those vehicles do? They burn carbon. We're trying to clean up the air by saying we're going to burn more fuel to get that out here. That just somehow that's a little incongruent to me. So, seeing what I missed here, the author of the bill, they did try to work with that gel issue by saying we're only going to require this in the warmer months, and I do appreciate that. And then they made the amendment to restrict it to the air quality non-containment zones. Well, let me tell you, less than 4 years ago, we were one pin stroke away from 90% of the U.S., including Colorado, being in a non-attainment zone. Those proposals are still sitting in EPA files. We could very well be less than a year away with the new administration putting us back into a non-attainment zone. And the way this bill is written, that then means virtually all of Colorado will need to use these fuels, including the mountain areas with their colder temperatures and thinner air. So I just see problems here, there, and everywhere in this bill. And finally, the states that have used an incentive approach to increase the use of biodiesel, they're using much, much more biodiesel in those states than the states that have tried to mandate it the way that we are. So if we want more biodiesel, let's reward it. Let's give an incentive to use biodiesel. There is one particularly troubling part in the bill. Actually, I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with this bill that another good strike blow wouldn't solve, but I don't think we're going there. So the most troubling part of this bill is an increase to 10% in 2023 until we know what our supply is, until we know how the studies work out as to how this is going to work and how the mixing takes place, all of those types of things, that is particularly troubling to have that in the bill with no chance of some sort of a variance should we decide we need one without it coming back to this body. So to that one item, Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer an amendment.
All right, we do have an amendment at the desk.
We do. The amendment has.
Will the clerk please read Amendment L011?
Amendment L011, Senate Bill 38 by Senator Heisey, amend the Transportation and Energy Committee report dated January 28, 2020, page 1, strike section, substitute section, page 1, line E.
Senator Heisey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a very simple amendment. It strikes lines 12 through 15 on page 1, which is the section that deals with the increase to 10% in 2023. I would ask for an aye vote on this amendment just based on the simple fact we don't know how the supply chain is going to work out. We don't know how the mixing all takes place throughout the state. Some supplies come out of Nebraska, some Wyoming, some out of New Mexico. So I would ask for an aye vote to. I what?
And Senator Heisey, if you could please move Amendment L011.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Amendment L011.
Thank you so much, Senator. Any further comments on the amendment?
I ask for an aye vote.
All right, thank you. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the comments from the amendment sponsor. I would ask for a no vote on this. The purpose of this bill is to ensure that this happens. But there is a section in the bill that provides for a pretty broad authority to either temporarily or indefinitely suspend the requirement if there is a limited supply. So I think it's unnecessary because the bill accounts for if there is a supply concern and allows the people who manage our fuel supply in Colorado to be able to make that waiver or exemption. I ask for a no vote.
All right, any further discussion on L011? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. The amendment is lost. Mr. Majority Leader, to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of very quick comments. I hear a lot of the concerns that are coming about this bill. Whether I wanted to or not, I heard a lot of these concerns since this bill was discussed in the interim committee, I think, in September. So this has been an ongoing discussion, and I appreciated learning a whole lot more about the different industries that would be impacted. And I think it actually has been a very fruitful conversation. I'm proud of where the bill is now. It doesn't 100% address everything, but I think it gets real close. For instance, some of the trucking industry is concerned. There is not only a process for an exemption if the fuel is truly incompatible or if there is a limited supply that would impact costs, but there's also something in here on request of the trucking industry to potentially create an incentive or a grant program to help those truckers replace their trucks to get newer ones that not only can handle things like biofuels better, but are much cleaner. And I think that is important because it helps the truckers, it helps the biofuel industry, but it also helps our air quality. So there are aspects in here to address that issue. I would also say the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union is supporting this bill. That doesn't mean they speak for every farmer out there, but it does mean that I think the grave concerns potentially are overblown if a large portion of the ag industry is saying that actually we not only are okay with being required to use this fuel, but we see this as an economic development issue for us down the line. It's true there's not large scale production of biodiesel in Colorado. That's why there's a portion of this bill to encourage incentives and grant programs that would actually create that industry, which would help ag as well as the folks that do the producing of the biodiesel. I will just say one quick correction. I think the closest biodiesel facility is actually in Kansas. I'm not saying that that is super close necessarily, but it is closer than the allegations that it is in Iowa. With that, I ask for an aye vote. I do think this is in a good place, addresses the vast majority of the concerns, and that's why several folks within the industries impacted have either come on board to support or are neutral or feel like it is at least something they can implement without major impacts.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Majority Leader, I do have some questions, and maybe it's not pertinent to the bill, but I'm trying to understand the infrastructure. Would we have to set up, would these, would the filling stations, the truck stops, have to add tanks? Would they do the blending themselves, or is it blended at the refinery? So that we kind of understand, will the refinery have to do a new infrastructure, add tanks for blending, or will it be specific companies? Can you help me understand how that will work?
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are good questions. My understanding is that the blending generally already occurs at the refineries, and the reason for that is partially because there's already a mandate from the federal government to require certain degrees of biofuels. And the refineries want to follow that also because then they can get the blenders credit from the federal government. So a lot of this already happens. We are just simply requiring that it happens at a certain percentage. But again, it is there's an economic reason why the refineries already do some blending, because if you put 1% of biodiesel into your diesel, you get that federal credit. So it is already occurring. This is just requiring it to happen at a certain percentage over time. However, the blending could happen elsewhere. Doesn't mean it can only happen there, and that is only if OPS passes a rule based on limited supply, and they feel like there is a limited supply, so we need to make sure that more people have access to blend. And that's why there's a section in here that is a may, it's permissive, and again, it's only over supply concerns. They may require a refinery to sell clear diesel. And they can charge whatever they want, so if that refinery really doesn't want anyone buying that clear diesel because it means they can't get the credit, I'm guessing they will charge a lot of money for that clear diesel and disincentivize someone from purchasing it. But it would require them, under these circumstances, if this rule is passed, to sell it so that a retailer could then go and blend it themselves and provide that product to consumers. So generally speaking, I think the blending will all be occurring at the refineries, but there potentially could be an option down the road for OPS to say, actually, we think there are supply constraints, and we want to allow the retailers more of an ability to do blending if they would like to, and if they see it as in their interest to do so.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So currently then, if that was the way we did it, they would either truck or pipe the biodiesel to the refinery from where that biodiesel is produced and then blend it there, or they could truck it to some of the larger companies like Flying J truck stops and those type, and they would blend it themselves. Is that what I heard you say?
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. And keep in mind, we are referring to biodiesel generally, but the bill also would include renewable diesel, which does have much more of an ability to enter normal pipelines and things like that. So I think it depends on the product you're talking about, and this bill is agnostic and basically says this is the requirement. The market will tell us which product is going to really get more attention.
All right. Any further discussion on the bill as amended? Seeing none, then the question before us is the passage of Senate Bill 38. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate Bill 38 is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
The motion before the committee is to rise and report. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. The committee will rise and report. Thank you, sir.
The Senate will come to order. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the report. Oh, pardon me. Mr. President, the committee has met and had a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, the committee will beg the reports that consideration of the following test bills being second reading. The makes the following recommendation on Senate Bill 108 as amended, Senate Bill 38 as amended, pass second reading, and goes place accounted for the reading and final passage.
Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of the report.
The motion is for the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 108 is amended. Senate Bill 038 is amended. Passed on second reading, ordered and grossed in place on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Governor's appointments consent calendar. Will the clerk please read the appointments on the consent calendar?
Members of the Colorado Aeronautical Board for terms expiring December 19th, 2022. Ken Hugh Hollensinger, Walden, Colorado, serves as a member from the Western Slope and represents local governments which operate airports appointed. Amy K. Miller, back from Colorado, serves as a member from the Eastern Slope and represents local governments which operates airports appointed.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the confirmation of all the appointments on the consideration of governor's appointments consent calendar, including members of the Colorado Aeronautical Board.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is for the confirmation of all the governor's appointments listed on the consent calendar. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 32 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 3 excused, all the appointments on the consent calendar are confirmed to the Colorado Aeronautics Board. Governor's appointments. Will the clerk please read the appointments listed on the Colorado Energy Research Authority?
Members of the Colorado Energy Research Authority for terms expiring July 1st, 2023. William R. Tor, Boulder, Colorado, appointed. Mark N. Cirangello of Lafayette, Colorado, reappointed.
Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the appointments of the members of the Colorado Energy Research Authority, William Tour and Mark Cirangello. I know I'm saying that wrong, but he was a great guy, and we should appoint him to the board.
The motion is for, is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is for the confirmation of the governor's appointments on the Colorado Energy Research Authority. Are there any no votes? Senators Cook, Sonnenberg, Lundin, Crowder, Heisey, Gardner, Woodward, the Minority Leader, Rankin. Senator Marble. With 22 ayes, 10 no votes, 0 absent, and 3 excused, those appointments are confirmed to the Colorado Energy Research Authority. Committee reports.
January 30th, 2020, Committee on Health and Human Services, after consideration of American Committee following Senate Bill 28 be amended as follows, and as so amended, be referred to the Committee on Appropriations with a favorable recommendation.
Members, as is customary at the end of our first month back together, we'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our interim birthdays. So if the Center Choir will convene, we would like you to join us at the well so that we can acknowledge the following birthdays from the months of September through December. With the following senators, please make your way to the well. Senator Garcia, September 2nd. Senator Fields, September 7th. Senator Lundin, October 2nd. Senator Cook, October 6th. Senator Lee, October 11th. Senator Priola, October 16th. Senator Donovan, October 17th. Senator Rankin, October 18th. Senator Todd, October 28th. Senator Marble, November 1st. Senator Danielson, November 16th. Senator Foote, December 1st. Senator Pedersen, December 16th. And Senator Zenzinger, December 29th. With that being said, and those of you that are left to assemble the choir.
Yeah. Hey, Steve. Hey, Tammy. Am I on the list? September through December.
You are too. We're all having birthdays. You have to get
down here. Yeah. You guys sing.
On the count of 7. Happy birthday to everybody.
Happy birthday to everybody.
Happy birthday, August Collins. Happy birthday to you. We don't make our money singing.
Announcements. Members, I'm going to start off with one announcement that's really important. As we move forward in the session, if you can try to follow this custom of ensuring that if you plan to be if you plan to be excused that day, that you check in with the majority leader and the minority leader and do your best to announce that at the well, if you can anticipate that. If not, I would hope that you would jointly text message and or call Cindy and I. The text message is probably the best, just so that we can keep good accounting. With that, announcements. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judiciary Committee will be meeting for the SOMB as soon as you can get there. Thank you.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, some of y'all may be aware that yesterday a random individual busted out a window in my car, and I just want to extend my appreciation and thanks sincerely to Denver Police Department, to the Colorado State Patrol, and to the sergeants and Senate staff for all of their concern in rectifying the situation. It's all good. Everything's going to be okay. But I just wanted to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude. Thank you.
Senator Crowder.
Thank you. Personal privilege, sir?
Granted.
I also had my window broke out, and I'd like to thank that scum that did it. Here's the thing. I had my wallet in the glove box with cash in it. My Stetson was in there, and they didn't take that. But I wanted to thank this garbage individual for breaking that window and thanking him for leaving that stuff there. Thank you.
Further announcements. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. When it comes to political rivalries, sometimes we know how to exercise those here, and other times we get along fabulously. But when it comes to sports rivalries, for me as a Broncos fan, the Oakland Raiders are the team that I just cannot ever root for. They are the opposition. In hockey, it is the Detroit Red Wings. Las Vegas Raiders, I may make some Broncos fans groan, but Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, go get them. Go Chiefs.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, and I hope everybody enjoys the Super Bowl this weekend. I do want to leave us with this thought. The last thing the Oakland Raiders ever did was lose to the Denver Broncos.
We're doing.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, it looks like a few folks have left early, so we are going to do a call of the Senate and ring the chimes. Just kidding. I'm joking about half of that. but we actually will be ringing the chimes. But it's because apparently we have some new chimes, and we are going to test them out, and we figured we would do it now while you're already here, not while you're like in the bathroom or in your office or something, and then you scurry over here thinking it was a call of the Senate. So we'll be doing a test, but you can pay attention to it or not, but that's what's going on. And additionally, I think we will also be doing a second phase of the testing next Friday, but we will remind you then. I think everyone got their W-2s, their tax forms, except for the folks that were excused today. So thank you for doing that. Mr. President, I think for now I will move that the Senate adjourn until 10 a.m. Monday, February 3rd, 2020.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The Senate will be in adjournment until 10:00 hours on Monday, February 3rd, 2020.